What is going on, guys? It's Andrew here with the TBSG podcast.
I'm Gabe.
And I am Jose.
And I'm Mo.
Let's get right into the poetry. All right, so we're going to start off. We've been doing a lot of work with Sarah Dowling, and we're actually getting into a new piece of poetry called Shadowboxing by Joseph Rios. So we're going to tie some of those themes in together. Mo's going to talk about that right now.
Okay, so neoliberal multiculturalism is a really big word. So before I jump into its definition, I'm going to give an example. 2 years ago in a Super Bowl, Kendall Jenner was in an ad aired by Pepsi that showed her handing a Pepsi bottle to police officers that kind of like were involved in police brutality. And that was taken as like, you know, a really like racist and inconsistent way of kind of talking about like racism and police brutality, where like, you know, Kendall Jenner's handing a Pepsi and that kind of just solved the issue.
Right.
Which, you know, is a much deeper rooted issue than like, you know, what the ad showed. It showed that, oh, hand a Pepsi and like all your problems are solved. Mm-hmm. So that's really an example where like companies use multiculturalism to for like a capitalistic gain. And that's where the neoliberalism comes in, where it's not actually inclusive. It's more of like a way to
like, hey, we're diverse, like, come buy Pepsi.
Yeah, further their reach across different people.
Exactly, like where it doesn't really make that much sense. So that kind of like ties into our book, where like our author is talking about a different culture and different languages that we're not traditionally like used to or might not be exposed to all the time, and how that kind of like the neoliberalism kind of plays into that even in his work.
Mm-hmm. To add on to that, the translingual poetics that Dowling delves into in her writing really blend and change the meaning of the writing, because they're using different languages and it's meshing the two together, so it's not wholly English or solely Spanish or what other native languages that they're using, but it's putting that all into one, and it requires you to use physical motion to understand it, as well as understanding the root meanings and cultures of each of the languages.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like I guess like when Dowling's main argument is that a lot of work and poetic work that we see employs neoliberal multiculturalism, where it doesn't actually include or incorporate other cultures. It just has this sort of like appearance of showing that. So Gabe, you had a excerpt from Shadowboxing which kind of like showed this.
Thanks, Mo. This is an excerpt from Shadowboxing by Joseph Rios. I've seen this shit. I'm talking about boys, young boys, smaller than these, younger than these, hauled off in chains, gunned up and clacked up quick, shanked up. They're all wet.
Joseph, please explain.
Explain what? I'm in my zone right now.
Please explain what you mean by wet, so they call and understand.
Damn, man, are you serious? First of all, if Nabokov decides to use French or Russian in his English work, we're all supposed to fall in line and either A, skip over what we don't know, or B, learn French and Russian. But the second a brother like myself decides to use slang in Spanish or English, or both, I gotta follow up and tell you what I really mean? So, first off, what we thought was interesting about this excerpt is that it comes from the prologue of Shadowboxing, and normally a prologue isn't a major part of the book, but in this case, the prologue is almost like a script, a movie script, because he's has different parts that are dialogue from other people that he is impersonating, and we assume that the other voice that is telling him like to please explain is a sort of narrator or almost like an editor for the book. And we thought this was really interesting because he's in his zone and he's just being himself, and which he is used to having, like incorporating slang, English and Spanish within his language and how he speaks, and having that editor or narrator ask him to explain himself is almost like forcing himself to change his own explanations to fit the mold of like what the audience, the general audience he assumes would understand.
All right, guys, that kind of concludes today's episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of it. Next week we have Obama on the podcast, so look forward to that. See you guys next time.